Last time, I talked about mistakes made by new D&D players, but DMs make just as many mistakes, if not more mistakes, than our players do. And if anything, it's more important that DMs rectify those mistakes in order to give our players the best experience possible. So today, let's go over 7 mistakes made by new Dungeon Masters, and if we're being honest, old Dungeon Masters too sometimes. Alright, tip number 1, not having a Session 0. This one is incredibly important. Session 0 is arguably one of the most important things a Dungeon Master can do before the first dice even hits the table. Why? Well, that's because it is super important to establish expectations for your players about what this game is going to be about, and to communicate with their players about what they should expect from the game, what characters they should be making, what kind of tone you're going to set, how difficult the combat is going to be, etc. This is super vital to having a good game. 9 out of 10 horror stories that people tell me happen mostly because the DM didn't have a Session 0 to tell their players, hey, this campaign is good aligned, so make good aligned characters, something like that. Just communicating with your players can avoid so many issues. You don't want to set up a campaign with a lot of heavy combat elements only for your players to come in with unoptimized characters and you kill them on Session 1. That would be really lame, right? If you're going to have a Diablo-style dungeon crawl, you have to tell your players. If you're going to have a Call of Cthulhu investigation with not much combat, you have to tell your players. Having a Session 0 is incredibly important. When I made this mistake, it didn't result in like end of campaign sort of stuff. I mean, we survived, it was fine, but there were times where characters just didn't really fit together. The party didn't mesh as well because I wasn't mediating any sort of meeting between players before the actual campaign started. So we had like a necromancer who was teamed with an Oath of Vengeance paladin who swore to fight the undead, and players who weren't really experienced with roleplay, so that really never came up, and it was kind of weird, right? So that happened because I didn't have a Session 0. That was on me. So yes, have a Session 0. It's incredibly, incredibly vital to your campaign. Not getting invested in the party. What do I mean by this? I mean that you as the DM should be fans of the characters that your players play. Now, I don't think this matters as much if you're doing like a Doom style Slaughterfest where characters will go in and out, but in a story-based campaign, a story-rich campaign, like you're basing it off of High Rollers or Critical Role, for example, where characters are very vital, where characters will stick around for a long time, it's all about character building and story, you as the DM should be fans of your characters, of the party that you're DMing for. You should like the characters. This is important because D&D is collaborative storytelling. You're collaborating with your players, and an important part of that, and I've talked about this before, is roping in your characters' backstories, roping in their lore, roping in a quest that is focused around characters or a certain character. Critical Role models this really, really well. I've been watching Knights of Evening Star, which is on the D&D YouTube channel. They also model this very, very well, roping in stories tailored to specific characters. It really helps with that collaborative storytelling aspect. It's hard to create stories for characters, though, if you're not invested in them, if you don't care. A big part of helping with this, and this is what I do, is I am loosely involved in character creation. At my current home game, every single player is new, so I had a good reason to sit in at character creation to help them out. But even if you're playing with experienced players, I recommend that you at least loosely participate in character creation for no other reason than you should know what to expect from your players, right? You want to know their class, their race, so that you know what's going on before Session 1 begins. But the other reason, more in line with this point, is that when you are sitting in on character creation or you're communicating with your player while they're making their character, you can see the excitement on their face or in their voice. It is amazing. I was recently sitting in with 2 new players. The other players, the 3 others, weren't experienced with D&D, but they knew at least a little bit about the game. These two players that I was inviting to my game a little later, they were both brand new to the game. Like, one of them had played, I think, one shot, and then the other had never even played in her life. She hadn't even seen a Let's Play. She just wanted to join in because she thought it sounded cool. And watching them get excited about their characters, being overwhelmed by all the choices that they had, choosing all of their different class features, and choosing what race they wanted to play, and describing what they think their character would look like, that was so cool. Now, I don't want to kill their characters because I'm invested in them too. Now, of course, I will kill them if I have to, but the fact that I care makes it better for me, because now when I write a quest hook for them, that quest hook is going to be better because I care about their characters too. That is incredibly important as a DM. Get invested in your players' characters. Be fans of your party. It is one of the most important things in my mind to a story-rich game. This one is sort of in line with the last point, but forgetting to incorporate player backstories is definitely one of the number one things that I see new DMs sort of forget. D&D is a very big game. I've said it multiple times. It can be very overwhelming to write a campaign, especially a homebrew one. Even running a module can sometimes be overwhelming. But don't forget that the stories your players write are really useful tools. If I'm ever stuck, out of ideas, I don't know what to do for the next session, we're not at a place where I can rope in one of my major quest hooks, I will start planting seeds and incorporating the backstories that my players have written for their characters, because those can make for some really interesting quest hooks, even for the players who that quest hook doesn't focus on. Like, for example, my players all got really interested in my Lovecraftian aspects of my world, and my campaign originally wasn't going to focus much on that at all. It was like a one-off, last-ditch effort thing to kill a boss. They were going to get like a hint of these very powerful eldritch deities, and it would probably come up maybe once or twice after that. Maybe they'd fight a cultist or two, and we'd move on. But they really enjoyed that aspect of my world. One player in particular got really hyped about it, and I offered him sort of a deal to get more connected with that realm of my universe and become a warlock, and he ended up taking it. And whenever I got stuck, I would sort of try roping in that Lovecraftian aspect, because not only did he really enjoy it, but the rest of the party do as well. And now, my druid in my party, she has a very cool connection with the goddess of the moon and love in my universe. And recently, I'm not gonna lie, I got a little stuck in terms of my campaign. We're not anywhere close to my major quest hook for this next arc of their journey. And so I decided to fill in time with having them visit the city of Shalator, where a lot of that goddess's followers convene. It was really cool for both the character of the druid and the player who plays that druid. She really enjoyed having this aspect of the journey focus on her home and her backstory. It was really cool, and it's not done yet. I'm still wrapping up that arc of their journey. But it was a really good way for one to move the plot along, because we needed to get rid of a relic that the party had, and a hidden city under the watchful eye of a moon goddess is a pretty good way to do that. And two, we wanted to have a sort of Christmas session, and well, again, hidden city under the watchful eye of a moon goddess is a pretty cool place to have a Winter's Crest festival, right? So yeah, using player backstories can be a great tool for you, the DM, to fill in space and to get you ready for your next major plot hook, but it's also really awesome for players. It's really cool for them to see the aspects of their character come out in the campaign. And if you're a fan of your characters, your party, like I recommended in this last point, it'll be all the easier for you to write those quest hooks. Do yourself a favor, use player backstories. This one is really important. Tip number 4 is not facilitating and not rewarding player creativity. We've all heard the DM woes about the murder hobo, or about just players who always take the video game solution. Kill everything in the room. last time I talked about how D&D is not a video game, and I recommended to players that they find creative solutions to solve problems, because D&D, while it is at its core wish fulfillment, as I said last episode, it is also a game in your imagination. There are many, many ways to solve problems. However, the DM needs to facilitate those creative solutions. If the players ask to perform a skill check to talk to the guard, and the DM just roadblocks them and doesn't let them talk to the guard, that's pretty silly. That basically shuts down any sort of creative solution for the players, and it dissuades them from trying that sort of method in the future. If kill everything in the room is the only solution that the DM offers, then kill everything in the room is the only thing the players are going to do. We DMs need to allow players to take creative solutions and reward players when they come up with those solutions themselves. I love it, absolutely love it. Whenever in a combat situation or in a roleplay situation, players do things creatively. Creative spell use, creative dialogue choices. Those things are rewarded by me with advantage, or straight up just saying, oh, you automatically passed. That was a great speech, or that just works because that was a really cool use of a spell. Make sure to reward players. If you want to have a cool story-based game where a lot of interesting stuff happens and not just kill everything in the room, you need to facilitate those happenings, and you need to make sure that you encourage players through reward. Make sure, for tip number 5, not to get defensive. This one might seem a little obvious, and it is. I mean, on the surface, yeah, I don't want to get defensive around my players when they correct me on a rule or a story beat. But in the moment, when you're playing the game and you're hyper-focused and you're trying to manage all these things, it's easy to lose that sort of barrier that you have, the one that allows you, well, barrier might be the wrong word, but that mental space that allows you to take in criticism. When you're in the moment, it's hard to sort of retain that, at least for me, and I've seen myself get a little frustrated sometimes when the player corrects me on a lore thing. This is my homebrew world. You'd think I'd know a thing or two about it, but very often, I do get things wrong, and instead of getting defensive, I should really reward players for that sort of thing. I mean, they're remembering minor lore details in my world. I shouldn't be getting frustrated over that, but in the moment, that does occasionally, every blue moon, happen, and yeah, that's not good and something I'm working on. Same thing with rules. I'm not a stickler for rules, and if someone corrects me on rules, I'll just look at it, look in the book, and move on. But I have seen in games I've played and games I've watched that DMs occasionally do get very frustrated when a player corrects them on rules. Now, of course, if a player is being a rules lawyer, that's a discussion you need to have with them in private. But if someone's just trying to get the rules right and corrects you on like the DC of their spell, for example, don't get frustrated. Just make sure they're correct and then move on. Make sure not to get defensive over all things. Be accepting. Don't be a pushover. I talked about that in I think my very first video, where you need to be a little bit assertive when it comes to gameplay rules and courtesy rules, but don't be a jerk yourself, because that's not going to help the table at all. You're the DM. You're supposed to be running this whole show. If the guy running the whole thing is a dick, it's not going to end very well. Tip number 6 might seem a little stupid, but just trust me on this. It's drink water. You, when you're DMing, are hyper focused on the session. Just trust me, it's going to happen. I don't think of much else other than just running the game when I'm playing. And I'm not saying that DMing sucks or that that's a bad thing. When I'm hyper focused and playing the game, I'm really having fun. But the problem is, I'm not really paying attention to much else, including, water. And when the game ends, I suddenly feel incredibly crappy because, I haven't drank water for 3.5 hours. That's a problem, and the simple way to fix that problem is to look at your DM screen, the space behind your DM screen, look at your space, clear out a little spot of space, put a coaster down, and put a mug of water on it. That's it. Just have a glass right in front of you so that you remember, hey, I've got water right there, and to take a drink. This has been a serious problem for me. I swear, 60% of my games, I forget to put down a glass of water, and at the end of the game, I feel like absolute garbage, which is not fun. My throat is dry, it's sore, I'm losing my voice because I wasn't drinking water, and I was talking for like almost 3 hours straight, right? So, don't forget to drink water. It will make your DMing life a lot easier. That's just like a petty tip, and for some of you, you might just be on top of it and you might not need that, and you might remember to go over to the fridge and grab a bottle of water, but when I'm DMing, I never remember to do any of that. I need to have a glass of water right in front of me. So yeah, remember, drink water. It's important. Okay, tip number 7, a bit more real. It is don't get frustrated if players don't roleplay, especially if they're new players. Now, for my first ever home game, as in, the game I had in my living room, I had all new players, and, well, none of them at the time were comfortable with role-playing. Not a single one spoke in character because they simply weren't ready for that kind of thing. And it took a very, very long time for these players to get acclimated to speaking in character and to role-playing. It took almost, I believe at least, almost a year, maybe more than a year. I'd have to check my calendar. I was role-playing. I was playing NPCs, I was doing all the voices, accents, all that stuff. And at the beginning, I was frustrated that they weren't reciprocating, but in hindsight, I realized it was a little bit too much to ask them to respond to NPCs in character. It takes a while to get used to roleplay. You can't force someone to get into D&D and to play a character and to do a voice and all that. That's just not going to happen. Players need to come up to that naturally. They need to do that on their own. And you know what? Some players are going to take a really long time to finally get to that point, and that is okay. Just because some people are willing and happy to play out a character and to have fun role-playing as a different person, that doesn't mean everyone is just able to do that. Some people are going to get nervous, and again, that's perfectly fine. Just be patient. I had to wait a long time for players to finally start talking in character, or to start interacting with NPCs in character, thinking about what they want to do in the game aside from game stuff. Like one player in my game who never really roleplays in character, but he does have a vision for what he wants his bard to do. In fact, he just bought a sewing book in character as his bard, as well as getting a D&D sewing book on his phone so that he can sew the party clothes. That is super cool, and I was so proud when I saw that happen in my last session, actually, yesterday. So yeah, even if players don't roleplay, people find cool ways to play their characters. Just be patient and don't get frustrated. I guess that's a really good way to discourage your players and lose the fun of D&D. And that is going to be all of them. If you guys enjoyed today's episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more episodes of this series, as well as my RPG horror stories, then please do hit that subscribe button. And finally, if you want to leave your thoughts, then go down into the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.